The transport ship descended through the orange clouds of Prime, carrying 47 students from 12 different species across the galaxy. Maya pressed her face against the cold viewing port, watching the alien landscape emerge below. Mountains of purple crystal stretched toward the sky, and rivers of silver liquid cut through valleys of black stone. She had never seen anything like it. Maya was 17 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that she kept tied back in a practical braid. Her skin was pale from spending too much time in space stations, and her hands were rough from years of work in her father's recycling shop on Luna Colony. She was the only human in this entire program, a fact that the other students reminded her of constantly. The Galactic Integration Academy had accepted her on a scholarship, a rare opportunity for a human from the outer colonies. The Academy trained the best young minds from across the known universe, preparing them for leadership positions in the Galactic Council. Maya had scored in the top percentile on the entrance examinations, beating out thousands of applicants from wealthier, more advanced civilizations. But test scores meant nothing here. The other students looked at her like she was a curiosity, a primitive creature that had somehow wandered into their sophisticated world. The ship landed with a gentle bump, and the students began filing out into the harsh sunlight of Prime. Maya grabbed her small bag of belongings and joined the line. Ahead of her, a student named turned and looked down at her with his 4 gleaming eyes. "Excited for the survival assessment, human?" he asked, his translator device rendering his clicking speech into standard galactic. There was mockery in his tone, barely hidden. Maya met his gaze steadily. "Should I not be?" Laughed, a strange sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest. "The assessment is designed for species that have evolved beyond your limitations, but I suppose the Academy must maintain its diversity quotas." Maya said nothing. She had learned that responding to such comments only encouraged more of them. Instead, she stepped past and walked out onto the rocky surface of the planet. The air was thin but breathable, with a slight metallic taste that made her nose itch. The gravity was heavier than she was used to, perhaps 1¼ times Earth standard. She adjusted her posture slightly, distributing her weight more evenly across her feet. Instructor was waiting for them at the base of the landing ramp. He was a species known for their military discipline and harsh teaching methods. His gray skin was covered in ritual scars, and his single eye swept across the gathered students with cold assessment. "Welcome to Prime," he said, his voice carrying easily across the group despite the wind. "For the next 30 planetary rotations, this world will be your classroom, your testing ground, and possibly your grave. The survival assessment begins now." A student raised one of her 6 arms. "Instructor, we were told we would receive orientation before the assessment began." I narrowed. "Orientation is for species that require hand-holding. You are students of the Galactic Integration Academy. You will adapt or you will fail. There is no middle ground." He gestured toward the crystal mountains in the distance. "Your objective is simple. Reach the beacon at the summit of Mount within 30 rotations. Along the way, you will face challenges designed to test your physical capabilities, your mental fortitude, and your ability to work with others who are different from yourselves." Maya studied the mountain. It was perhaps 50 kilometers away, rising sharply from the valley floor to a peak that disappeared into the orange clouds. The terrain between here and there looked brutal, a maze of crystal formations, deep crevasses, and areas that seemed to shimmer with dangerous radiation. "You will be divided into groups of 4, continued. "Each group will be composed of students from different species. Your success or failure will be determined as a group. If one member fails, all members fail." There was a murmur of discontent among the students. Maya understood why. Many of the species represented here had historical conflicts with one another. Forcing them to cooperate would be challenging under the best circumstances, and these were far from the best circumstances. Your groups have already been assigned, said. When I call your name, join your designated team. Maya listened as names were called, watching groups form across the landing area. Some students seemed pleased with their assignments, while others looked openly hostile toward their new teammates. Team 7 announced, of Senna of Thorn of Maya of Earth. Maya's heart sank slightly. Was the student who had mocked her on the ship. She didn't know the others, but she could see them now, gathering near a large crystal formation. Was tall and angular, with a hard exoskeleton that gleamed in the sunlight. His species had evolved on a world of constant warfare, and they were known for their strength and aggression. Senna was a species that resembled what humans might call mermaids, though the comparison was imprecise. She had smooth blue skin, large dark eyes, and gills along her neck. Her lower body was supported by a mobility harness that allowed her to move on land, but she was clearly uncomfortable in this dry environment. Thorn was a plant-based species that communicated through a combination of pheromones and subtle movements. He stood motionless, his bark-like skin blending almost perfectly with the crystal formation behind him. Maya approached her new team, keeping her expression neutral. I'm Maya, she said. I look forward to working with all of you. Clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. The human speaks as if she has a choice in the matter. We all have choices, Maya replied. I'm choosing to be professional about this. Senna made a sound that her translator rendered as a sigh. Let us not waste time with conflict. We have a long journey ahead of us. Thorn said nothing, but a faint smell of agreement drifted from his direction. Instructor approached their group carrying a small container. Your supplies, he said, setting it down at their feet. Use them wisely. There will be no resupply. Maya opened the container and examined its contents. There were water purification tablets, emergency ration bars, basic medical supplies, and most importantly, 4 bars of raw, a metal alloy used throughout the galaxy for tool and weapon making. Each team has been given the same supplies, explained. How you use them will determine your survival. The creatures of Prime are not friendly to off. You will need to defend yourselves. Instructor said, 4 bars of are hardly sufficient for adequate weapons. Then you will need to be creative, replied. The assessment begins at dawn tomorrow. I suggest you use the remaining daylight to plan your approach. He walked away, leaving the 4 students standing around their meager supplies. Immediately took charge as Maya had expected he would. This should be divided based on capability, he announced. My species has the strength to shape metal with our bare hands. I will take 2 bars. Senna, your people have some metalworking knowledge. You may have 1 bar. Thorn, your kind has natural defenses and requires no weapon. And me, Maya asked. Looked at her with what might have been pity. Humans are not known for their metalworking abilities. Your hands are soft, your strength is minimal, and you lack the biological adaptations necessary to shape without tools. It would be a waste of resources to give you a bar. So I should face the dangers of this planet with nothing. You could stay at the back of the group, suggested. Let those of us who are capable handle the fighting. Maya felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Getting emotional would only confirm what already believed about humans, that they were weak, irrational creatures driven by primitive instincts. I understand your reasoning, she said calmly, but I would like the opportunity to contribute to our team's survival. Perhaps there is another way I can be useful. Senna nodded thoughtfully. The human raises a fair point. We cannot afford to waste any potential advantage. Perhaps she could carry extra supplies or scout ahead. Scouting requires speed and stealth, said. Humans possess neither. Maya bit back her response. There was no point in arguing. She would have to prove herself through actions, not words. The team spent the remaining daylight hours planning their route up the mountain. Dominated the discussion, dismissing any suggestions from Maya without consideration. Senna occasionally interjected with practical observations, while Thorn remained silent, communicating only through occasional bursts of scent. As the orange sun began to set, casting long shadows across the crystal landscape, the students prepared to rest. Each species had different sleep requirements, which presented its own challenges. Could go for days without rest, but would eventually need a long dormancy period. Senna required regular sleep, but could do so standing up. Thorn entered a form of photosynthetic meditation that served a similar purpose to sleep. Maya needed regular sleep cycles, ideally lying down, which pointed out was yet another inconvenient human limitation. Maya found a relatively flat area of rock and spread out her thin thermal blanket. She wasn't comfortable, but she had slept in worse conditions. Growing up on Luna Colony, resources had always been scarce. Her family's recycling shop had operated on the edge of profitability, and there had been many nights when she had gone to bed hungry. But those hardships had taught her something valuable. They had taught her to make do with what she had, to find solutions where others saw only problems. Might dismiss her as weak and primitive, but Maya knew something about survival that he didn't understand. Sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't the sharpest blade. Sometimes it was the will to keep going when everyone expected you to quit. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreaming of the mountain that awaited them. Dawn came quickly on Prime, the orange sun rising over the crystal peaks and flooding the valley with harsh light. Maya woke before the others, a habit ingrained from years of early morning shifts at her father's shop. She stretched her stiff muscles and looked around at the alien landscape. In the daylight, she could see more details of the terrain they would be crossing. The crystal formations that had seemed beautiful from the ship now looked treacherous, their sharp edges capable of slicing through flesh with ease. The ground was uneven, covered with loose stones and hidden crevasses, and in the distance, she could see movement, creatures of some kind patrolling the lower slopes of the mountain. Maya walked a short distance from the camp, careful not to wake the others. She wanted to observe, to gather information that might be useful. As she moved, her foot struck something partially buried in the rocky soil. She knelt down and brushed away the debris, revealing what appeared to be a bone. It was large, perhaps from some animal that had died here long ago, and it was remarkably well preserved. The bone was dense and heavy, with a slight curve to its shape. Maya picked it up, examining it closely. An idea began to form in her mind. She had grown up in a recycling shop, surrounded by materials that others had discarded. Her father had taught her to see value where others saw only waste. "Everything can be useful," he used to say. "You just have to know how to use it." That had claimed was certainly valuable, but it wasn't the only option. This bone was strong, perhaps as strong as some metal alloys. And unlike, it didn't require enormous strength to shape. It just required patience and knowledge. Maya found a sharp crystal fragment and began to work on the bone, scraping away at its surface with careful, precise strokes. It was slow work, but she had learned patience long ago. Each stroke removed a tiny amount of material, gradually revealing the shape hidden within. By the time the others woke, Maya had returned to the camp, the bone hidden in her pack. She would continue working on it during their journey whenever she had a spare moment. Let have his. She would create her own weapon. The team set out as the sun rose higher, taking the lead with his characteristic confidence. He had used his incredible strength to bend one of the bars into a rough blade, which he now carried in one hand. It wasn't elegant, but it looked deadly. Senna had fashioned her bar into a long spear, using techniques passed down through her aquatic civilization. They had been creating weapons from metal for thousands of years, even in their underwater cities, and her craftsmanship showed. Thorn carried no weapon, relying instead on the natural thorns that covered his body and could be ejected with surprising force and accuracy. Maya walked at the back of the group as had suggested. She didn't mind. It gave her time to observe, to learn the patterns of this alien world, and it gave her time to work on her bone whenever the others weren't watching. The first few hours of travel were uneventful. The terrain was difficult but manageable, and they made steady progress toward the mountain. Maya kept pace with the others despite the heavier gravity, her body adapting to the strain with surprising efficiency. Seemed almost disappointed by the lack of challenges. Perhaps the instructors have overestimated the dangers of this world, he said. I expected more of a test. Don't invite trouble, Senna warned. The assessment has barely begun. As if in response to her words, a sound echoed across the Crystal Valley, a high-pitched keening that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Maya felt the hair on her arms stand up, an instinctive human response to danger. What is that? She asked. Thorn released a burst of alarm pheromones, and his bark-like skin seemed to ripple with tension. Crystal wraiths, said, his 4 eyes scanning the surrounding formations. Predators native to this world. They live in the crystal structures and emerge to hunt. Maya looked at the crystals around them and felt a chill run down her spine. There were thousands of formations in every direction, any one of which could be hiding a predator. How do we fight them? She asked. We run, Senna said, already moving. Crystal wraiths are nearly impossible to kill. Their bodies are partially made of living crystal, which reforms even after severe damage. The team began to move quickly, abandoning their steady pace for something closer to a jog. Maya struggled to keep up, her human lungs burning in the thin air. But she refused to fall behind, refused to prove right about her weakness. The keening sound grew louder, and Maya caught glimpses of movement in the crystal formations, shapes that seemed to flow like liquid through the solid structures. She counted at least 5 of the creatures, maybe more, converging on their position from multiple directions. There, shouted, pointing toward a narrow gap in the crystal wall ahead. We can bottleneck them in that passage. It was a good tactical decision, Maya had to admit. In a narrow space, the wraiths couldn't use their numbers to overwhelm the team, but reaching the passage meant crossing 50 meters of open ground while the creatures closed in. They ran. Maya's legs pumped beneath her, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the wraiths behind her now, their crystalline bodies making a sound like breaking glass as they moved. Senna reached the passage first, followed closely by Thorn. Paused at the entrance, turning to face the approaching predators with his blade raised. Maya, hurry, Senna called. Maya was still 20 meters from safety, when the first wraith emerged from a crystal formation directly in her path. It was terrifying. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a twisted mass of living crystal and something that might have been flesh. Its eyes glowed with an inner light, and its mouth was a jagged opening filled with crystal teeth. Maya skidded to a halt, her heart racing. She had no weapon, no way to defend herself against this monster. The wraith lunged. Maya threw herself to the side, her body moving on pure instinct. She felt the creature's claws pass within centimeters of her face, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from its crystalline body. She hit the ground hard, the rocky surface scraping her palms and knees. But she was already moving, rolling to her feet and sprinting toward the passage. The wraith recovered quickly, its body flowing like water as it changed direction. But Maya had gained precious meters, and she used every one of them. She dove through the gap just as the creature's claws raked across her back, tearing through her jacket but missing her flesh by millimeters. Was there immediately, his blade flashing as he struck at the wraith's reaching arm. The bit deep into the crystal flesh, and the creature screamed, a sound that vibrated through Maya's skull. But the wound was already healing, the crystal reforming even as Maya watched. "Move," shouted, and the team retreated deeper into the passage, the wraith's keening cry following them into the darkness. They emerged on the other side of the crystal wall, gasping and exhausted. The wraiths hadn't followed, apparently unwilling to enter the confined space of the passage. Maya collapsed against a rock, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her back stung where the creature's claws had grazed her, and her hands were bleeding from the rough landing. Stood over her, his expression unreadable. "You almost got us killed," he said. "I almost got myself killed," Maya corrected. "You three made it through safely. If you had been faster, stronger, you would not have been in danger." Maya looked up at him, too tired to be angry. "You're right," she said. "I'm not as fast as you or as strong, but I'm still here. I'm still alive. And I'm going to reach that mountain with or without your approval." Stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his four-eyed gaze. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it might have been the beginning of acknowledgement. "Clean your wounds," he said finally, turning away. "We have a long way to go." That night, while the others rested, Maya continued working on her bone. The shape was becoming clearer now, a curved blade with a handle that fit perfectly in her hand. It wasn't, but it was hers, created from nothing with her own skill and determination. She thought about the wraith attack, about how close she had come to dying. Was right that she wasn't as physically capable as the others, but she had survived, not through strength or speed, but through instinct and will. Humans hadn't conquered Earth by being the strongest or fastest creatures on the planet. They had done it by being adaptable, by using their minds to overcome their physical limitations. Maya was determined to prove that the same qualities that had made her species successful on one world could work on another. The bone blade was almost ready. Tomorrow she would show and the others what a human could do. The team continued their journey the next day, climbing higher into the crystal mountains. The air grew thinner with each hour, and even began to show signs of fatigue. Maya struggled but kept pace, her body adapting to the harsh conditions with remarkable efficiency. They encountered more dangers along the way. Radiation zones that required careful navigation, unstable ground that threatened to collapse beneath their feet, and always in the distance, the keening cries of the crystal wraiths. But the team worked together, using each member's unique abilities to overcome the obstacles. Strength cleared paths through crystal barriers. Senna's knowledge of fluid dynamics helped them cross a river of the strange silver liquid. Thorn's ability to sense changes in the environment warned them of hidden dangers. And Maya contributed too, in her own way. She noticed patterns that the others missed, connections between seemingly unrelated observations. She remembered details from their briefings that proved useful at critical moments, and she kept the team's morale from completely collapsing during the darkest hours. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic of the group began to shift. Still dismissed many of her suggestions, but he listened more often than he had at the beginning. Senna began to actively seek her input on problems. Even Thorn, silent as always, seemed to position himself closer to her during rest periods, as if offering silent support. On the fifth day, they reached a plateau where they could finally see the summit of Mount. It was still far away, but it was visible, a gleaming beacon that promised an end to their ordeal. "We're making good time," Senna said, consulting her navigation device. "At this pace, we should reach the summit with several rotations to spare." "Don't become complacent," warned. "The final approaches are always the most dangerous." Maya looked at the mountain and felt a strange mix of emotions. She was exhausted, battered, and far from home. But she was also proud. She had survived this long, had proven herself at least partially in the eyes of her teammates. But she knew the hardest part was still ahead, and she had a feeling that her bone blade would be tested before this journey was over. She ran her fingers along its edge, feeling the sharpness she had created through hours of patient work. It was ready. She was ready. Whatever came next, Maya of Earth would face it head-on. The plateau offered a brief respite from the brutal climb, but Maya knew they couldn't afford to rest for long. She sat apart from the others, working on the final details of her bone blade. The weapon had taken shape over the past 5 days, each spare moment devoted to scraping, shaping, and sharpening the dense material. Senna approached her, moving carefully on her mobility harness. This blue skin had taken on a grayish tint from the dry air, and her gills flared constantly as she tried to extract moisture from the thin atmosphere. "What are you making?" Senna asked, genuine curiosity in her large dark eyes. Maya held up the blade. It was curved like a crescent moon, about 30 centimeters long, with a handle wrapped in strips of fabric torn from her jacket. The edge caught the orange sunlight and gleamed with a sharpness that rivaled any metal. "A weapon," Maya said simply. Senna leaned closer, examining the craftsmanship. "This is bone. From some creature that died on this planet long ago. I found it near our landing site." Bone is an unusual choice. Most species abandoned bone tools millions of years ago in favor of metals. Maya smiled slightly. Humans learned to use bone before we learned to use metal. Our ancestors survived ice ages, predators, and countless other dangers with nothing but sharpened bone and stone. We haven't forgotten those skills, even if we don't need them often anymore. Senna was quiet for a moment. Believes humans are primitive. He judges your species by the fact that you only recently achieved compared to other galactic civilizations. "And what do you believe?" They considered the question carefully. "I believe that survival is not always about having the most advanced technology or the strongest body. Sometimes it is about persistence, about refusing to accept defeat." "That's a generous assessment." "It is an honest one. I have watched you these past days, Maya. You struggle where we do not, but you never stop. You adapt. You find solutions that we would never consider because we are too focused on what we already know." Maya didn't know how to respond to the unexpected praise. She had spent so much time defending herself against dismissal that she wasn't prepared for acceptance. "Thank you," she said finally. "That means more than you know." Approached before Senna could respond. His exoskeleton was scratched and dented from their encounters with the mountain's dangers, but he still moved with the same aggressive confidence. "We need to discuss our approach to the summit," he announced. "The terrain ahead is more treacherous than anything we have faced so far." The team gathered around as sketched a rough map in the rocky ground. According to their intelligence briefings, the final approach to Mount Summit was guarded by 3 major obstacles. The first was a field of razor crystals, formations so sharp that they could slice through most materials with ease. The second was a nest of crystal wraiths, far larger than the pack they had encountered earlier. The third was the summit itself, which was surrounded by an unstable electromagnetic field that disrupted most technology. "Our navigation devices will fail in the electromagnetic zone," explained. "We will have to find our way by sight alone." "What about our translators?" Senna asked. "If those fail, we won't be able to communicate." "We will have to manage. The zone is not large, perhaps 10 kilometers in diameter. We can cross it in less than a day if we move quickly." Thorn released a complex burst of pheromones that his translator interpreted as concern about the wraith nest. It was the most communication they had offered since the journey began. "The nest is unavoidable," admitted. "We could try to go around, but that would add at least 5 rotations to our journey. We don't have that kind of time." "So we fight through?" Maya asked. Looked at her, and there was something different in his expression. Not exactly respect, but perhaps acknowledgement that she had earned the right to participate in this discussion. "We move through as quietly as possible and fight only if necessary. Our supplies are too limited for a sustained battle." The team packed their gear and began the descent from the plateau. The path ahead led through a narrow canyon filled with the razor crystals had mentioned. Even from a distance, Maya could see how dangerous they were. The formations rose from the ground like frozen flames, their edges catching the light with an almost hypnotic beauty. "Stay in single file," ordered. "One wrong step here could cost you a limb." They entered the crystal field with extreme caution, led the way, using his superior vision to identify the safest path. Senna followed, her mobility harness whining as it carried her through the treacherous terrain. Thorn came next, his bark-like skin actually resistant to minor cuts. Maya brought up the rear, stepping precisely in the footprints of those ahead. The canyon seemed to go on forever, a maze of deadly beauty that tested their concentration to the limit. Maya's muscles ached from the constant tension of watching every step, every movement. Sweat dripped down her face despite the cool air. Halfway through the field, disaster struck. Senna's mobility harness caught on a crystal formation, throwing off her balance. She stumbled, her arms swinging out instinctively to catch herself. "No," Maya shouted, but it was too late. Senna's hand connected with a razor crystal. The blade-sharp edge sliced through her blue skin like it was paper, and dark blood sprayed across the ground. The screamed, a sound that echoed off the crystal walls and seemed to multiply. Maya rushed forward, ignoring the danger, and caught Senna before she could fall onto more crystals. "Let me see," Maya said, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. The cut was deep, running from Senna's palm to her wrist. Blood pumped from the wound with each heartbeat, far too quickly for comfort. "Pressure," Maya said, wrapping her hand around Senna's arm. "I need bandages from the medical kit." Was already moving, pulling supplies from his pack. He handed Maya a roll of sterile bandages, and she began wrapping the wound with practiced efficiency. Her father had taught her first aid along with everything else, a necessary skill when you worked with potentially dangerous machinery. "The cut needs stitches," Maya said, "but bandages will have to do for now. Can you move?" Senna's face was pale, her gills fluttering rapidly. "I think so. The harness still functions." "Good. We need to get out of this crystal field. Thorn, can you help support her if needed?" The moved closer to Senna, positioning himself so she could lean on him if necessary. Another burst of pheromones communicated his willingness to help. Watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. "You handled that well," he said to Maya. "Where did you learn medical skills?" "On Luna Colony. My father's shop dealt with heavy machinery. Accidents happened. We couldn't always wait for professional medics." "Your colony sounds harsh." "It was, but it taught me to be resourceful." They continued through the crystal field, moving more slowly now to accommodate Senna's injury. The gritted her teeth against the pain, refusing to slow them down more than necessary. Maya stayed close to her, watching for signs of shock or blood loss. It took them 4 more hours to clear the razor crystals, emerging onto a rocky slope that led toward the wraith nest. By then, Senna was exhausted, her blood loss taking a serious toll despite Maya's efforts to stem the bleeding. "We need to rest," Maya said. "Senna needs time to recover." "We cannot afford to stop," argued. "Every hour we waste is an hour we might need later. If Senna collapses in the middle of the wraith nest, we'll lose more than hours. We'll lose a team member." Bristled at being challenged, his mandibles clicking in frustration. But he looked at Senna, saw how she swayed even while standing still, and his expression softened slightly. 2 hours, he conceded. Then we move regardless of condition. Maya helped Senna sit down on a flat rock, checking her bandages and giving her water from their dwindling supply. The cut had stopped bleeding actively, but the needed more than rest to fully recover. "I'm sorry," Senna said quietly. "I should have been more careful." "Don't apologize. This terrain would challenge anyone. You're doing remarkably well for someone so far from water." Senna managed a weak smile. "Are more adaptable than many believe. We did not become a spacefaring species by staying in our oceans." "Tell me about your," Maya said. "I've never seen an ocean. Luna Colony had nothing but rock and ice." The distraction seemed to help. Senna began describing a world covered almost entirely by water, with depths that no surface species could imagine. Her people had built cities in the darkest trenches, where the pressure would crush most life forms. They had learned to navigate by sensing electromagnetic fields, to communicate through patterns of bioluminescence. "It sounds beautiful," Maya said. "It is, but it is also dangerous. The deep waters contain creatures that make the crystal wraiths seem tame. We learn to survive from the moment we are born." Maya thought about that, about how every species in the galaxy had faced its own challenges and developed its own strengths. They had evolved on a world of constant warfare. They had conquered the crushing depths. They had learned to thrive in environments that would kill most organic life. And humans had survived an ice age with nothing but stone tools and determination. Maybe they weren't so different after all. The 2 hours passed quickly. Senna's color had improved slightly, and she insisted she was ready to continue. Led them toward the wraith nest, which they could see now as a massive crystalline structure rising from the mountainside. "Stay quiet," instructed. "Crystal wraiths are sensitive to vibration. If we're careful, we can pass through without alerting them." The nest was enormous, a honeycomb of chambers carved into the living rock. Maya could see movement inside, the flowing shapes of wraiths going about their alien business. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. If even a fraction attacked, the team would be overwhelmed. They entered the outer edges of the nest, moving with agonizing slowness. Every footstep was carefully placed, every breath controlled. Maya's heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she was certain the wraiths could hear it. The deeper they went, the more wraiths they saw. The creatures seemed to be in some kind of dormant state, their crystalline bodies glowing faintly in the darkness. Maya realized that they were nocturnal hunters, resting during the day and emerging at night. "If we can get through before sunset," she whispered too, "they might not wake at all." He nodded, increasing the pace slightly while still maintaining stealth. The team wound through the narrow passages, sometimes having to turn sideways to fit through gaps in the crystal formations. They were almost through when Thorn's foot dislodged a small stone. The sound was tiny, almost imperceptible, but to the sensitive wraiths it might as well have been an explosion. The nearest creature stirred, its crystalline eyes flickering to life. It turned toward the team, its jagged mouth opening to release that terrible keening cry. "Run!" shouted, abandoning all pretense of stealth. The team sprinted through the nest as wraiths awakened all around them. The keening cry spread from chamber to chamber, a wave of sound that summoned every creature in the structure. Maya ran harder than she had ever run in her life. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she refused to slow down. She could hear the wraiths behind them, their crystalline bodies crashing against walls as they gave chase. The exit was ahead, a bright opening that promised safety. Reached it first, turning to help the others through. Senna stumbled, her injured arm throwing off her balance, and Thorn caught her, pushing her toward the opening. Maya was the last one out, and she felt a wraith's claws rake across her back just as she dove through the gap. The pain was sharp and immediate, but she didn't stop, rolling to her feet and continuing to run. They didn't stop until they had put a kilometer between themselves and the nest. Finally, gasping and exhausted, they collapsed on a rocky outcropping. "Is everyone alive?" asked between breaths. Affirmative sounds came from the team. Maya touched her back and felt blood, but the wounds weren't deep. She had been lucky again. "That was too close," Senna said. "We almost didn't make it." "But we did make it," Maya replied. "That's what matters." Looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, there was genuine respect in his eyes. "You kept pace with us. Despite everything, you kept pace. I told you I would reach that mountain. You did, and I'm beginning to believe you might actually do it." Maya smiled despite her exhaustion and pain. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The team rested briefly, tending their wounds and catching their breath. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the mountain. According to estimate, they were now within the electromagnetic zone. Their technology would start failing soon. "We should move while we still have light," said. "The final approach is just ahead." They climbed the last section of the mountain as the sun disappeared below the horizon. True to his prediction, their devices began to malfunction. First the navigation units, then their translators. Soon, they were reduced to basic gestures and facial expressions to communicate. It was surprisingly effective. Maya had learned to read her teammates over the past days, to understand their body language and anticipate their needs. Pointed, and they followed. Senna gestured caution, and they slowed. Thorn's movements indicated danger, and they took cover. The summit appeared through the darkness, a gleaming structure that pulsed with electromagnetic energy. The beacon was visible at its peak, a bright light that marked their destination. Almost there, Maya breathed. And then the ground shook. Something emerged from the rocks ahead of them, something massive. Maya's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and her heart sank as she realized what they faced. It was a crystal wraith, but not like any they had seen before. This one was easily 10 times the size of the others, its body a towering mass of living crystal that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes burned with ancient intelligence, and its mouth opened to release a keening cry that threatened to split Maya's skull. The Alpha, the queen of the nest. They had awakened it when they fled, and it had followed them here. Raised his blade, but Maya could see the doubt in his posture. His weapon had barely scratched the normal wraiths. Against this creature, it would be useless. Senna tried to ready her spear, but her injured arm betrayed her, and the weapon slipped from her grasp. Thorn launched his thorns at the creature, but they bounced harmlessly off its crystalline hide. The Alpha Wraith advanced, its massive body moving with surprising grace. Maya could feel its presence like a physical weight, pressing down on her with primordial terror. This was it. After everything they had survived, they were going to die within sight of their goal. Maya's hand found the bone blade at her hip. She drew it, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. The weapon felt pitifully small against such a massive threat. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Everything can be useful, you just have to know how to use it." She studied the creature, looking for weaknesses. Its body was covered in crystalline armor, but armor always had gaps, joints, connections, places where the structure was weaker. There, at the base of the creature's neck, where its head connected to its body, the crystal was thinner there, almost transparent, and inside she could see something pulsing, a core of some kind, the wraith's heart. Maya moved before she could think, before she could let fear stop her. She sprinted toward the creature, her bone blade raised. Shouted something, but without translators she couldn't understand it. It didn't matter. She was committed now. The Alpha Wraith saw her coming and swung one massive arm. Maya ducked under it, feeling the wind of its passage above her head. She kept running, closing the distance. The creature's other arm came around in a sweeping motion. Maya jumped, planting her foot on a crystal formation and launching herself upward. The arm passed beneath her, missing by centimeters. She was on the creature now, climbing its crystalline body like a mountaineer scaling a cliff. The surface was sharp, cutting her hands and feet, but she didn't care. She could see the weak point above her, pulsing with dark light. The Alpha Wraith thrashed, trying to shake her off. Maya held on with one hand, the bone blade gripped tightly in the other. She pulled herself higher, inch by painful inch, until she was level with the creature's neck. The weak point was right in front of her. The crystal was thin enough that she could see through it, see the pulsing core inside. Maya drove the bone blade forward with all her strength. The impact sent a shock wave through her arm, nearly breaking her wrist, but the blade held. The bone, sharpened over days of patient work, penetrated the crystal where it had failed. The Alpha Wraith screamed, a sound that seemed to shake the entire mountain. Its body convulsed, throwing Maya free. She fell, hitting the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. But she had done enough. The creature staggered, its movements becoming erratic. Dark light leaked from the wound in its neck, and cracks began spreading across its crystalline body. The keening cry became weaker, more desperate. With a final shudder, the Alpha Wraith collapsed, its body shattering into 1,000 glittering fragments. Maya lay on the ground, staring up at the stars. Her entire body ached, her hands were bleeding, and she was fairly certain she had cracked at least one rib. But she was alive. His face appeared above her. Without translators, he couldn't speak, but his expression said everything. He reached down and helped her to her feet, handling her with a gentleness she wouldn't have believed him capable of. Senna and Thorn gathered around, their own faces reflecting the same mixture of shock and admiration. Maya had done what they couldn't. She had faced the most dangerous creature on this planet and won. Not with superior strength or advanced technology, with a piece of bone and the determination to use it. Maya looked at her blade still clutched in her hand. It was cracked now, damaged by the force of the blow, but it had served its purpose. It had saved them all. She looked up at the summit, so close now. The beacon pulsed in the darkness, calling to them. "Let's finish this," she said, not caring that the others couldn't understand her words. They understood her meaning. Together, the team climbed the final distance to the summit of Mount. The beacon stood in the center of a flat platform, a pillar of light that reached up into the night sky. Around it, other teams were already gathered. They had made it. They had survived. Instructor appeared from somewhere, his single eye taking in the team's battered condition. Without translators, he couldn't speak to them, but he nodded once. Approval. Recognition. Maya sat down on a rock, too exhausted to stand any longer. She had done it. The primitive human, the weak link, the diversity quota. She had reached the summit, and she had saved her team in the process. Sat down beside her. He gestured at her bone blade, then at her, then touched his chest. Without words, his meaning was clear. "Thank you." Maya smiled and leaned back, looking up at the alien stars. Tomorrow, the translators would work again. There would be debriefings and evaluations and all the bureaucracy that came with galactic education. But tonight she would rest. She had earned that much. The human girl who had sharpened a piece of bone had proven that sometimes the oldest tools were the best ones. The electromagnetic field dissipated with the dawn, and the summit of Mount came alive with the sound of restored technology. Translators hummed back to life. Navigation devices beeped their activation sequences, and communication relays crackled with incoming transmissions. Maya woke to find medical personnel attending to her wounds. A medic cleaned the cuts on her hands and back, applying a healing salve that tingled against her skin. "You're fortunate," the medic said, his gray face impassive. "These wounds could have been much worse." "I'm aware," Maya replied, wincing as he touched a particularly sensitive spot. Around her, the other teams were receiving similar treatment. Of the 12 groups that had started the assessment, 9 had reached the summit. 3 had failed, their members extracted by emergency transport after various accidents and encounters with the planet's wildlife. Team 7 was among the survivors, battered but intact. Senna's arm was being professionally bandaged, the deep cut already showing signs of healing thanks to advanced medical treatment. Thorn stood motionless in a patch of sunlight, photosynthesizing and recovering his energy. Was speaking with instructor near the beacon, his gestures animated in a way Maya had never seen before. She watched the conversation from a distance, unable to hear what was being said but able to read the body language. Was telling the story of their journey, and from his movements, she could tell he was describing the battle with the Alpha Wraith. At one point, he mimicked the motion of climbing, then of striking downward. He was describing what she had done. Instructor listened without expression, his single eye occasionally flicking toward Maya. When finished, the instructor said something that made the student pause, then nodded and walked away, his posture different somehow, more thoughtful. Approached Maya directly, his face casting shadows in the morning light. "Student," he said, "has given me an account of your team's journey. He tells me you killed an alpha crystal wraith using a weapon you crafted yourself from bone." "That's correct, sir." "May I see this weapon?" Maya reached for the bone blade, which she had kept close even while sleeping. She handed it to the instructor, watching his face carefully. Examined the weapon with professional interest. He tested the edge with his thumb, turned it over in his hands, studied the craftsmanship of the handle. His expression remained neutral, but Maya thought she detected a hint of something else beneath the surface. "This is remarkable work," he said finally. "The bone has been shaped using techniques that predate metal tools by hundreds of thousands of years on most worlds. The edge is as sharp as anything I've seen outside of molecular forges." "My father taught me," Maya said. "He ran a recycling shop. He believed everything could be useful if you knew how to use it." "Your father was wise," handed the blade back to her. "The other teams were given the same supplies as yours. Bars, standard equipment. Not one of them thought to look beyond what they were given. They shaped the steel because that was what they were told to do. I wasn't trying to be different. I just worked with what I had available." "That is precisely the point, student." His voice carried a weight that Maya hadn't heard before. "The Galactic Integration Academy does not train leaders by teaching them to follow instructions. We identify those who can see possibilities where others see limitations, those who can adapt when circumstances demand it." Maya wasn't sure what to say. She had spent the entire assessment feeling like the weak link, the primitive human who was holding her team back. Now the instructor was speaking as if she had done something noteworthy. "When you were given no, most students would have complained or given up," continued. "You found another solution. When faced with a creature that conventional weapons couldn't harm, you identified a vulnerability and exploited it. These are the qualities we seek in future leaders." "I was just trying to survive," Maya said honestly. "Survival is the foundation of all leadership. Those who cannot keep themselves alive cannot keep others alive. But you did more than survive. You saved your team. You turned disadvantage into advantage. You demonstrated that the age of a species does not determine its value." Paused, his single eye fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Humans have been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries," he said. "In galactic terms, you are infants. Many of the species at this academy have civilizations spanning millions of years. They have technologies that humans cannot comprehend, capabilities that seem like magic to your kind. I'm aware of our limitations, sir." "Are you? Because I don't think you are. I think you see only what you lack, not what you possess." Gestured toward the other students gathered on the summit. "Look at them. They have strength. They have ancient knowledge. They have environmental resilience. But none of them did what you did." Maya looked at her fellow students, was speaking with members of another team, showing them something on his device. Senna was resting against a rock, her face peaceful despite her injury. Thorn stood apart as he always did, but his position seemed less isolated now. "Humans have something that we have identified in only a handful of species across the galaxy," said. "We call it adaptive resilience. The ability to face situations you are not prepared for and succeed anyway. It cannot be taught or engineered. It emerges from millions of years of evolutionary pressure, from survival against impossible odds." "Every species survives impossible odds," Maya pointed out. "That's what evolution is." "True, but most species survive by becoming better at specific tasks, stronger, faster, more intelligent. Humans survived by becoming better at everything at once, not superior in any single area but competent in all of them. and more importantly, able to improve rapidly when circumstances demand it. Maya thought about Earth's history, about the ice ages and mass extinctions that had shaped her species, about the countless times humanity had faced annihilation and found a way through, about her ancestors who had crossed oceans in wooden boats, who had walked across frozen continents, who had reached for the stars before they had even left their home planet. "We're stubborn," she said. "My grandmother used to say that humanity's greatest asset was our inability to recognize when something was impossible." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. That is one way to describe it. Another would be to say that you are supremely adaptable, capable of finding solutions in any environment, against any odds. Is that why the Academy accepted me, to test this theory? Partially. We wanted to see how a human would perform in an environment designed for more advanced species. We expected you to struggle. We expected you to fail. Sorry to disappoint. On the contrary, student, you exceeded every expectation we had, and in doing so, you proved something that many in the Galactic Council have long debated. Which is that humanity deserves its place among the stars, not despite being young and primitive, but because of the qualities that come from that youth. You are not burdened by millions of years of established thinking. You do not accept limitations as permanent. You see challenges as problems to be solved rather than facts to be accepted. Maya let these words sink in. She had come to the Academy hoping to prove herself worthy of the opportunity she had been given. She hadn't expected to prove anything about her entire species. "What happens now?" she asked. Now you complete your education. You learn what we can teach you, and then you return to your people and help them take their place in the galactic community." His tone softened slightly. "The galaxy is changing, student. Old powers are declining. New threats are emerging. The species that will lead in the coming centuries are not necessarily those with the longest histories, but those with the greatest adaptability. And you think humans might be one of those species? I think you have demonstrated that the possibility exists. What your people do with that potential is up to you." Turned and walked away, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. The transport ship arrived later that morning to take the surviving students back to the Academy. Maya found a seat near a viewing port, watching Prime shrink into the distance. The planet that had nearly killed her now seemed almost beautiful, its orange clouds and crystal mountains glowing in the sunlight. Sat down next to her, his exoskeleton showing the scars of their journey. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. Maya raised an eyebrow. "For what specifically?" "For everything, for dismissing you, for assuming you would fail, for treating you as less than equal." His 4 eyes met hers directly. "I was wrong. You were following your experience. Humans are new to the galactic community. You had no reason to expect anything from me." "That is a generous interpretation. The truth is, I was arrogant. I believed that my species' strength made me superior. I forgot that strength takes many forms." Maya smiled slightly. "We all have our prejudices. The important thing is recognizing them. I recognized mine when you climbed that alpha wraith and killed it with a sharpened bone. At that moment, I understood something about humans that I had never grasped before. Which is, you do not give up. Even when faced with certain death, you look for a way to survive. Even when every logical analysis says you should fail, you find a path to victory." Shook his head, a gesture he had picked up from human media. "It is terrifying, actually." Maya laughed, surprised by the characterization. "Terrifying." "Consider it from our perspective. They have evolved for millions of years, developing strength and combat capabilities that we believed made us superior warriors. And then we encounter a species barely out of its planetary cradle that simply refuses to accept defeat. How do you fight an enemy that does not know when to stop?" "I've never thought of it that way." "You wouldn't. It is like asking a fish to understand water, To you, this persistence is simply part of existence. To us, it is something extraordinary. Senna joined them, settling her mobility harness into a comfortable configuration. Her injured arm was wrapped in a regenerative bandage, already healing at an accelerated rate. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said. "Expressing admiration for another species is something I never expected to witness." "I am capable of growth," replied defensively. "Barely," Senna smiled to take the sting out of her words. "Maya, I wanted to thank you as well. Your quick response to my injury probably saved my life." "You would have done the same for me." "Perhaps, but I am not certain I would have acted as quickly or as competently. First aid is not common knowledge among. We regenerate most injuries naturally over time." "That sounds convenient." "It has its drawbacks. Because we heal easily, we do not learn to treat wounds. When an injury is beyond natural regeneration, we often do not know how to respond." Senna touched her bandaged arm. "Your species' fragility has taught you skills that we never needed to develop." "I never thought of it as an advantage before." "That is the nature of adaptation," Thorne said, surprising everyone. It was the first time they had spoken voluntarily since the assessment began. His translator rendered his pheromone and movement speech into a warm, measured tone. "All species develop strengths in response to weaknesses," Thorne continued. "The learned patience because we live slowly. The learned to navigate because their world had no solid landmarks. The learned to fight because their world was hostile." "And humans?" Maya asked. "Humans learned to do everything because your world required everything. Strength when strength was needed, speed when speed was needed, intelligence when intelligence was needed, and persistence always because your ancestors could never afford to give up." Maya considered these words. She had always thought of humanity's lack of specialization as a weakness, a sign of their evolutionary immaturity. But perhaps it was the opposite. Perhaps being forced to develop all capabilities at once had given humans something more valuable than any single strength. Flexibility, adaptability, the ability to face any challenge without the burden of expectations. The transport ship entered hyperspace, and the stars outside the viewing port stretched into lines of light. Maya watched the display, thinking about everything she had learned on Prime. She had entered the assessment as the outsider, the primitive human who didn't belong among the galaxy's elite species. She was leaving as something else, a representative of a species that had earned its place not through ancient heritage or advanced technology, but through sheer determination. The bone blade rested in her pack, cracked but intact. She would keep it, she decided, a reminder of what she was capable of when she stopped worrying about what she wasn't. The Academy ship arrived at the orbital station after 2 days of travel. Maya gathered her belongings and prepared to disembark with the other students. As she walked down the ramp, she noticed that people were looking at her differently than before. Word had spread about the Alpha Wraith, about the human girl who had climbed an unkillable creature and stabbed it in the heart with a sharpened bone. Maya could see the curiosity in their eyes, the reassessment of everything they thought they knew about her species. An administrator approached Team 7 as they entered the station. "The Dean wishes to speak with you," she said. "All 4 of you, immediately." They followed the administrator through the station's corridors to a section Maya had never seen before. The architecture here was older, more ornate, suggesting this was one of the Academy's original structures. The Dean's office was surprisingly modest, a simple room with curved walls and a panoramic view of space. Dean stood at the window, her back to them as they entered. She was a species known for their telepathic abilities and their role as mediators in galactic disputes. "Team 7, she said, turning to face them. Her eyes glowed faintly with psychic energy. "You have caused quite a stir." "We completed the assessment as required," said. "You did more than that. You killed an alpha crystal wraith, a creature that has been responsible for the deaths of dozens of students over the Academy's history. You worked together despite species differences that have caused conflicts elsewhere, and you demonstrated qualities that the Academy values above all others. Dean moved to her desk and activated a display showing their journey across Prime. Maya watched her own progress, the moments of struggle and triumph rendered in cold data points. The Academy exists to identify and develop leaders for the galactic community, the Dean continued. We have been doing this for 40,000 years, training students from thousands of species. In all that time, we have developed methods for predicting which students will succeed and which will fail. She looked directly at Maya. You were predicted to fail, student. Our models gave you less than a 12% chance of reaching the summit. You were considered a gesture toward diversity, not a serious candidate for advancement. Maya felt her cheeks flush. With respect, Dean, your models were wrong. They were, and that is precisely why I wanted to speak with you. The Dean's psychic eyes seemed to look through Maya rather than at her. Human beings have been a puzzle to the Galactic Council since first contact was established. Your species does not conform to our understanding of development. You achieved technological civilization in a fraction of the time it took other species. You spread across your solar system while still fighting wars among yourselves. You display behaviors that our psychologists classify as both self-destructive and supremely adaptive. We're complicated, Maya said. That is an understatement, but the assessment on Prime has provided data that helps explain this complexity. The Dean activated another display, showing a comparison of student performance across all teams. Every other student approached the assessment using the tools and methods their species had developed over millions of years of evolution. They relied on strength. They relied on knowledge. They relied on environmental reading. And humans. You, student, used everything available. You used strength when it helped. You used knowledge when it was relevant. You read the environment when necessary. And when none of those approaches worked, you invented a new solution on the spot. The Dean paused. That bone blade of yours, do you understand why it was able to penetrate the Alpha Wraith's armor when could not? Maya shook her head. The crystal wraiths of Prime have evolved a specific resistance to refined metals. Their bodies produce an electromagnetic field that weakens the molecular bonds in processed materials. It's why they've been so difficult to combat using conventional weapons. But bone isn't refined. Exactly. Bone is organic, natural. It exists in a state that the Wraith's defenses cannot affect. Your weapon succeeded not despite being primitive, but because of it. The Dean smiled slightly. You found an advantage in what others would have called a disadvantage. That is the essence of human adaptability. Maya thought about all the times she had wished for better equipment, better genetics, better circumstances. She had spent so much energy lamenting what she lacked that she had almost missed what she possessed. What does this mean for me? She asked. For my future at the Academy. It means that you will be given opportunities that other students are not offered, not because of favoritism, but because you have demonstrated capabilities that the Academy needs to understand better. The Dean looked at all 4 members of Team 7. All of you have demonstrated these capabilities, in fact. Your willingness to work together despite initial conflicts, to complement each other's strengths, to protect each other even at personal risk. These are the qualities we seek in future leaders. Shifted uncomfortably. I was not particularly helpful in that regard. No, you weren't, but you learned. You adapted. And by the end, you were treating student as an equal rather than a burden. That growth is also valuable. The Dean dismissed them shortly after, but her words stayed with Maya as she returned to her quarters. She had come to the Academy as an outsider, a curiosity. She was leaving the Dean's office as something else entirely. A representative of a species that the galaxy was finally beginning to understand. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Maya threw herself into her studies with renewed determination, no longer worried about proving herself but focused on learning everything she could. Her classmates treated her differently now, with a respect that had been absent before. Team 7 remained close, their bond forged in the fires of Prime. They studied together, trained together, and supported each other through the Academy's demanding curriculum. Became an unlikely friend, his initial arrogance replaced by a genuine appreciation for perspectives different from his own. Senna and Maya spent hours discussing finding unexpected connections between ocean depths and lunar caverns. Thorn remained quiet but present, a steadying influence on the group's dynamics. Maya kept the bone blade in a place of honor in her quarters. She had repaired the crack using a technique her father had taught her, filling the gap with a resin that made the weapon stronger than before. It hung on her wall, a reminder of what she had accomplished and what she was capable of. 3 years later, Maya graduated from the Galactic Integration Academy with honors. She was the first human to receive a commendation for exceptional performance, a designation that had been awarded fewer than 100 times in the Academy's 40,000-year history. At the graduation ceremony, Dean asked her to speak. Maya stood before an audience of thousands, students and instructors from hundreds of species across the galaxy. She could see in the crowd, Senna, Thorn, all the beings who had become her family far from home. "When I came to this academy," she began, "I was told that humans were primitive, that we were too young, too weak, too limited to compete with species that had been among the stars for millions of years. I believed it. I spent my first days here apologizing for my existence, trying to take up as little space as possible." She paused, letting the silence emphasize her words. "On Prime, I learned that I was wrong, not because humans are secretly as strong as or as ancient as. We're not. We are exactly what we appear to be, a young species from a small planet on the edge of the galaxy. But we are also something else. We are survivors. Our ancestors faced ice ages with nothing but stone tools. They crossed oceans without knowing what lay on the other side. They reached for the stars before they knew if such a thing was possible." Maya held up the bone blade, showing it to the assembled audience. "This weapon saved my life and the lives of my teammates. It is not made of advanced alloys or engineered materials. It is bone, sharpened using techniques that my species developed 100,000 years ago. And when the moment came, it succeeded where more advanced weapons failed. The galaxy is vast, and there is much that humanity does not know. We are late to the community of spacefaring species, and we have much to learn. But we also have something to offer: our stubbornness, our refusal to accept that something is impossible, our ability to find solutions where others see only problems. I am proud to be human, not because my species is the strongest or the oldest, but because we never stop trying. We never give up. And when the galaxy tells us that something cannot be done, we ask, why not?" The audience was silent for a moment, then stood, his 4 eyes gleaming, and began to applaud. Others followed, a wave of recognition spreading through the crowd. Maya looked out at the faces of beings from across the galaxy and felt something she had never expected to feel. She felt at home. The ceremony ended, and Maya found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Instructors congratulated her on her speech. Fellow students asked about her plans. Representatives from various organizations offered positions and opportunities. But it was a small group, waiting at the edge of the crowd, that caught her attention. Humans, a dozen of them, wearing the uniforms of new academy applicants. Maya made her way through the crowd to meet them. They looked at her with expressions she recognized, the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that she had felt 3 years ago. "Student," one of them said, "I mean graduate, we wanted to meet you, to ask you about what it's like here." Maya smiled and gestured for them to follow her. "Come with me, I'll tell you everything you need to know." As she led them away from the ceremony, she thought about everything that had happened since she first set foot on Prime. The challenges, the triumphs, the lessons learned. She had come to the academy as one human among thousands of aliens. She was leaving as proof that humanity belonged among the stars. And now it was her turn to help others discover the same truth. The future of humanity in the galaxy was just beginning, and Maya intended to be part of it every step of the way. Her bone blade hung at her hip, a reminder of where she had come from and what she was capable of becoming. The class had been forced to shape the steel. The human girl had sharpened a piece of bone, and in doing so, she had carved out a place among the stars.